In the previous section, we followed the best practices in backend testing. In this one, we will test the frontend and apply a series of best practices here. First, let's see how we can isolate the component and only test the JavaScript logic instead of having to deal with HTML. For that, we are going to use a small Vue.js application on top of an Express API. You don't need to know Vue.js to follow this example though. First, let's take a look at the server side to know exactly what we're dealing with. We have a database, a MongoDB database running on the background, storing users, and we have a controller. We can find it in the controllers folder, a user controller, similar with what we had in the previous sections that fetches the users. Remember the find all with address method, we used that in the previous section and we're going to use it in this one, but I kept the file intact. We have the users controller, which is again, it's the same as the one we used in the previous section to build our Express API that fetches users and updates users in a MongoDB database, but now we also have a front-end application that consumes this Express.js API. Now, how does that front-end application work? It's a Vue.js application. Again, you don't need to know Vue.js to follow this example. We have the client in this folder that is served via Express static, and within that we have this single index HTML file that has all of the components HTML that we're going to use for our example. It's a table of users, and along with the users we also have a button. Each button is connected to every one of the users, and once you click on that button, you make a call to the backend API and remove that user from the database. We import the JavaScript as a whole, as a bundle, after compiling it with Webpack. You can see this is the Webpack configuration. We have this very simple web app. It uses Babel to transpile JavaScript and also include any modules that we have in our node modules directory according to the package.json. Mainly, we're going to be using Axios, but we may need to install other packages. So Webpack it is for our configuration. But now let's take a look at the actual code. This is the code. This is how you create a new Vue application. We need 3 parts to the Vue.js constructor. The first one is an element, which is an item in the DOM where this component points to. Then we have the data, static data, the methods, series of actual functions, and the created hook that is run when the component is initialized. It's actually a lifecycle hook that Vue.js provides. Now, in order to isolate and test that logic, I'm going to grab that. Remember, this looks very similar to what we did with the application object in Express in the previous section that we talked about backend testing. And I'm going to export it as a single object to import it back here. So this decouples the application logic from what we are using. We are using Vue.js, but most of that logic is not specific to Vue or any framework for that matter. That is why you can follow the example without knowing Vue.js. So we can isolate it to a separate file, and then you can use a spread operator to include it with Vue.js. So there you go. We import the app object from the app file. We include it using the spread operator. And if I refresh, you can see the application is running. We have 7 or 8 users along with delete buttons. And now we can go ahead and write some tests. This is where we want to test without having to interfere with the DOM. We are going to be using Mocha and Chai to do the test. We just want to import the application object and make any changes and tests, write them on that object isolated from the rest of the application and specifically isolated from the HTML itself. I'm going to install Mocha and Chai as dev dependencies. Notice that since we are inside the client directory, the closest package.json file is the one of the client. So it's the one that is going to be used in our example and for running our tests. Any package installed from within the client directory goes straight into that package.json. And let's now write our test description. So we are testing the application, so this is as simple as it can get. And let's start writing the test cases. So our application should load all of the users automatically when it's bootstrapped. So we don't expect to have to refresh the controller to fetch the users. We expect all users to be available once the application loads. Since we don't have to test specifically for Vue.js, we will have to initiate the created hook ourselves. We will have to simulate what the Vue engine, the Vue runtime, would have done with the created webhook. We also have a before each method that runs before each test to do that. I've written down the second test case, which is the case when we delete a user. We want the user to be completely removed. Now, there are two ways of checking this. You can check with the DOM, of course, and see if the user you attempted to delete no longer exists in the table. But remember, we are not testing the DOM. We are trying to decouple our JavaScript logic from the actual representation. So we are dealing with an individual component. We are working with this component as if it was backend code, not frontend code. That is why, in order to check that, in one of the next videos, we are not going to use jQuery or any accessor for the DOM, because we no longer run within the DOM. It is possible to run Mocha tests in the DOM and see the results in the browser, but that is not what we are going to do. And the reason why we're not going to do that is because later down the line, we are going to use Nightmare.js to perform end-to-end tests and actually test the user interface in a more useful and meaningful way than, with unit tests right now. It provides more code coverage, it's more realistic. You can't have everything with unit tests. You need to prioritize your tests. In most applications, you don't have the resources to test everything. So the optimal strategy is to test individual components like it is your backend code, and then test the DOM with an end-to-end testing strategy, perhaps using Nightmare.js or Selenium or something else.